You're listening to the Crew Book Club podcast, the show that challenges you to change your mindset through hearing about dope books. Thanks for hanging with the crew to get advice, ask questions, and gain knowledge with me, your host, Sade Hill. What up, crew? What's good? Are you ready for another episode of the Crew Book Club podcast? Yes, I am always ready. Last week was a little emotional from the start of the pod, but like I said, I always want to keep it funky with you. I want to be transparent as much as possible doing this podcast with you guys. Did you all listen to the song I recommended by Tony Jones, No It's Bae? You should definitely check it out. I'm feeling good today. I'm feeling okay, if that's what it is. Like, I'm not overly like, whatever. And I'm not over like, yay, today is the day. I just feel like I'm always grateful. I'm always thankful for another day. And, you know, we need those days where it's kind of chill. I was able to run today because lately I've just been biking. I was just like, today I'm running. And so I did pretty good after having not ran for a week. Sunday, I'm doing the Spartan race. I can't wait to get into that. The 20 obstacles. It's a 5K. So I'm excited about that. But anyway, how are you all feeling today? Because, I always like to know and I always like to check in with you guys. Okay? So I hope you're feeling great. If not, and you need some uplifting, welcome to the Crew Book Club podcast. And I have a scripture for you guys on who gonna check me, boo. And God is always checking me, okay? This week, the scripture comes from the Believe Bigger Journal from Marshawn Evan Daniels. And I went back and looked at some other logins and journaling that I did. And day 40, Beyond Betrayal was a title. And the scripture that came out of that was Matthew 26:4, and it reads, "And they plotted to arrest Jesus in some slay way and kill him." And the passage that she has written, I highlighted some of the key things that pointed out to me. It said he loved, he served, and even allowed people close to him to betray him. Skip down a little bit. It says, no matter who you are, people will disappoint you, let you down, and violate your trust. That doesn't make it okay, but it also doesn't mean that you're hopelessly flawed either. On the contrary, betrayal is often a form of disruption that God may not send, but one he will use to reveal and develop our heart condition. Do you have the capacity to pray for someone who hurts you? Will you hold a grudge? Will you forgive? And will we let bitterness and regret take root in our lives and grow into distrust, isolation, and low self-esteem? God has a plan for you bigger than betrayal. Hold fast to a higher vision and believe in greater mission that God is preparing you for right now. Have more faith in your future than what it feels like a failure. And remember, sometimes we have to see a snake to know what one looks like. The prompt question was, what are some of the blessings you can find in the midst of betrayal? And their prayer on that page was, Lord, give me a healed heart that lets go of what no longer belongs in my life. Make me grateful and courageous navigator of change, such that my blessings and burdens will bring you glory. Amen. This was so good because it's kind of like they plotted to arrest Jesus and slay and kill him. And I read a little backup of the scripture, and it comes from the part in the Bible where Jesus is telling his disciple it's 2 days before he will be handed over for crucifixion. And at the same time, the priests and the elders are meeting secretly to capture Jesus and kill him. Specifically from the discussion from last episode, even our parents can betray us, class friends, the coworker you think is your friend. At the end of the day, people are human first. And when betrayal happens to us, we have to be thankful they revealed themselves. For me, I would rather have the snake bite me now than later. Like, seriously, I know it hurts and you get upset and we get emotional and we feel those things, and that's okay. But I feel like it's better to happen and you know about it than to continue to move in this happy, bubbly, gullible space, knowing that there's a snake in the grass. Just like she said in the passage, sometimes we have to see a snake to know what one looks like. So be thankful for those moments when someone betrays you. It takes a whole different level of mindset, but I feel like it's beneficial. It's like pivot how we think when those things happen. It's just like, you know what? I'm happy it happened. I'm happy it happened now than later, because the more you elevate and grow, you're going to have some snakes. So let God reveal those snakes to you. Listen to those snakes and move forward. Okay? Let's look beyond betrayal. Okay, so that was the Who Gon' Check Me Boo. And God is always checking us. I welcome a good check, okay? Because it keeps me on my toes and it keeps me on point. All right? So let's get into the book. Oh, and the disclaimer, the F-bomb will be dropped in reference of the book, okay? So close your little ears if you don't like to hear the F word. Our book we're finishing out to we're getting close to finish. I think we're covering chapter 8 and 9, which is the end of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. Y'all, this book was so good. It had me like, what? So yes, the last episode, y'all, like we made it through our second book. Finishing up chapter 8, the importance of saying no, and chapter 9, and then you die. Yes, it's inevitable. We're going to die. Okay? And I like how he wrote out the chapter as well. So let's get into chapter 8. Let's finish that up. I couldn't just pass by the remaining keynote topics in this chapter because it discussed boundaries, which we all need to set. It's very important we set these boundaries. We kind of touched on this in what the crew do section on episode 9 about time boundaries, like respecting your time and things like that, setting boundaries with family and work and all those things. In chapter 8, it touches on unhealthy boundaries versus healthy boundaries. On page 169, it says, by boundaries, I mean the delineation between two people's responsibilities for their own problems. And I hope I said that word, delineation. Anyway, people in healthy relationships with strong boundaries will take responsibility for their own values and problems and not take responsibility for their partner's values and problems. People in toxic relationships with poor or no boundaries will regularly avoid responsibility for their own problems and take responsibility of their partner's problem. Ooh. What do poor boundaries look like? Here are some examples. It reads, you can't go out with your friends without me. You know how jealous I get. You have to stay home with me. Or my coworkers are idiots. They always make me late to meetings because I have to tell them how to do their jobs. Here's another one. I can't believe you made me feel so stupid in front of my sister. Never disagree with me in front of her again. Or I love to take a job in Milwaukee, but my mother will never forgive me for moving far away. And this was the last one. I can date you, but you cannot tell my friend Sydney. She gets really insecure when I have a boyfriend and she doesn't. Whew, these are very unhealthy statements in a relationship. Which one are you? I felt like I've dealt with the whole... I can relate to, I love to take that job in Milwaukee, but my mother would never forgive me for moving so far away. I felt that in some instances, not necessarily moving away, but decisions that I've decided to make. Or I've been in that relationship where it's just like, oh, you can't go without me. I need to be there. Oh, ding, 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 ding. Red flag, red flag. But anywho, in each scenario, the person is either taking responsibility for problems / emotions that are not theirs, or demanding that someone else take responsibility for their problems and emotions. Ooh, this hits. Okay? This, like, I can totally relate to some of these in these unhealthy relationships, and I've had to recognize them. And when you start seeing them, it makes it easy to set those boundaries. So now that we can recognize what those signs can be, we can pivot and see that behavior a mile away. Some of the great points the author makes on page 171 and 172 is the mark of an unhealthy relationship is two people who try to solve each other's problems in order to feel good about themselves, rather than a healthy relationship is when two people solve their own problems in order to feel good about each other. It's like trying to be the superwoman or Captain Save a Hoe. Like, stop. It's unhealthy. I remember the last relationship, I decided not to stop the Save a Negro campaign. You know how sometimes as women, we might meet a guy, oh, he got so much potential, da-da-da-da-da. I feel like I'm at that point where it's like, you got potential, but what you been doing with that potential? Like, did you have this same potential 5 years ago? I'm 34. I'll be 35 this year. And I'm married though, but if I was single and I'm meeting a guy at 35, I'm like, what was your potential at 30? What was your potential at 25? Have you reached those goals? Have you made some significant change? But I remember being in college and I was moving to Tallahassee and I was dating a guy and he had a lot of potential and we're young, so it's just like, I'll give you a chance and opportunity. But in my mind, it was like, okay, if I can get him up to Tallahassee with me, set him up and do all of that things, then he could become a scholar like I wanted. But then I realized when he moved, he was just doing those things to try to please me and be with me. And it's like, no, he needs to be doing those things for himself. And that's just in a friendship or anything. Like, there's only so much you can help a person with. They have to be willing to take the action and do it themselves without you having to pull them to or force them to do it. You know what I'm saying? But I had to learn this, which is mentioned on page 174. It states, if I make a sacrifice for someone you care about, it needs to be because you want to, not because you feel obligated or because you fear the consequences of not doing so. Acts of love are valid only if they're performed without conditions or expectations. It's like, are you going to love me whether I do this or not? Or are you going to do it with intent of not needing me to do something else? Like, I'll do this if you do this, or I'm not going to do this because I don't want you to feel like this. It's like, yeah, there's times to compromise about certain things, but you also have to be genuinely doing something without expectation. And you should feel good about it. You shouldn't feel bad about it. So yeah, I had to learn that. I don't want to just leave you about what it is to be unhealthy. He discusses a person that has strong boundaries, which is stated on page 175. It says, people with strong boundaries understand that it's unreasonable to expect two people to accommodate each other 100% and fulfill every need the other has. People with strong boundaries understand that they may hurt someone's feelings sometimes, but ultimately they can't determine how other people feel. People with strong boundaries understand that a healthy relationship is not about controlling one another's emotions, but rather about each partner supporting the other in their individual growth and solving their own problem. It's not about giving a fuck about everything your partner gives a fuck about. It's about giving a fuck about your partner regardless of the fucks he or she gives. That's unconditional love, baby. And I feel like a lot of people lack unconditional love. And even though in the Bible it tells us we should be loving unconditionally, a lot of us are not. So let's work on being people that have strong boundaries, okay? So those are like there's some other really good points throughout this book. But, I can't touch on everything on here. I would literally be reading you the entire book. So I highly recommend getting it and learning how to not give a fuck about things you shouldn't be giving a fuck about. Okay? So let's get into chapter 9. And it's titled, And Then You Die. Okay? Like, we all know we're going to die someday. We just don't know when or how. Okay? Only God knows. You guys ever experience a near-death experience or know someone who has? Well, if not, you know somebody now. Me, I think it was like a year and a half. Like, I think when COVID was like high and crazy, it was April 2020. And I was in the hospital for like 5 days, and they could not figure out where this pain was coming from. I had surgery, but my family wasn't allowed to come up. And I really felt like I'm going to die. This is how I'm going to die. I don't know what. And I feel like I was going to be on one of those stories where I was walking around with cancer and doctors didn't find it type of vibe. I really thought I was going to die. And it even made it more difficult to swallow because family couldn't come up. It was just literally phone calls. Like my cell phone was my lifeline. And so, yeah. But anyway, during that time, I ended up getting better off of some medicines. Not 100%, but better enough where I felt like, okay, I'm not going to die. But in those moments, it felt like I was. And I remember leaving and realizing, like, darn it, am I really living? Like, am I really living my life? Like, if I died today, will I be happy or will I have regret? And on page 188 in chapter 9, he touches on that. It says, I came to the startling realization that if there really is no reason to do anything, there is also no reason to not do anything. That in the face of the inevitable of death, there is no reason to ever give in to one's fear or embarrassment or shame, since it's all just a bunch of nothing anyway. And that by spending the majority of my short life avoiding what is painful and uncomfortable, I had essentially been avoiding being alive at all. Oh, this was so good because when I actually thought about the times that I felt most alive, it was when I addressed the things I was stressing over, when I faced the fears that I was scared, the things I was scared to do, when I actually had those conversations that I felt were heavy. It just felt like I was really living after having those honest and transparent moments with people. And even now, learning to set boundaries and being okay if someone doesn't agree with my boundary, man, girl, I'm on a whole nother vibe. And some people might find it as like rude or mean, but I think typically when people find it rude or mean, it's because they haven't discovered how to set their boundaries yet. So I challenge y'all to do that. And that was not the challenge of the week yet, but it was just reading that section. That part really hit me. It's like, am I really living? And even when it comes to certain things that I may post, I want to live in the moment of not overthinking. Of course, I'm being rational. Having that relationship with Christ allows me to do that because he has that discernment. But then when I do something and I get feedback or kickback, it's like, I don't care. One, I'm confident what God told me to do. Two, I've set the boundary where I don't worry about what you say affect how I move. So it's just kind of like, if you don't agree, you don't agree. That's your prerogative. Okay? It's my prerogative. It's my prerogative. Hey. But anyway, I really like that point. Moving on in this chapter, I'm really big on living out that I'm my ancestors' wildest dream, and I'm going to be the generational change to my family bloodline. And if I were to die today, I would want to leave a great legacy, okay? And I ask you, what is your legacy? On page 199, he hops into that too. He says, what is your legacy? How would the world be different and better when you're gone? What mark will you have made and what influence would you have caused? And he says, they say that a butterfly flapping its wings in Africa can cause a hurricane in Florida. Well, what hurricanes will you leave in your wake? And this made me think when we talked about, I forget what episode it was. It was Who Gonna Check Me Boo? And it was 1 Kings 11:12. And it talked about how our decisions we make on what God asks us to do. And if we don't do it, how it can affect our kids. That's the legacy. So don't be hesitant to do things because you could be not doing something that doesn't have an effect on your family's legacy. So let's be our ancestors' wildest dreams and keep it pushing before we die. For real. So on page 201, he talks about how our culture today confuses great attention and great success, assuming them to be the same thing, but they are not. And this is where you don't have to be on 10 or what society deems as 10 to what the meaning of success is. Let me continue reading. He wanted us to know, and I want you to know, you are great already, whether you realize it or not, whether anybody else realizes it or not. It's not because you launched an iPhone app or finished school a year later or brought yourself a sweet ass boat. Those things do not define greatness. You are already great because in the face of endless confusion and certain death, you continue to choose what to give a fuck about and what not to. Every day you wake up and you have the opportunity to be great. And you are great. Think about those times when even if, I don't care what people say about that 9 to 5 and working a job, you getting up every morning, Monday through Friday, or whether you work Saturdays or whether you work 7 days a week, we get a day off. But anywho, you are doing great. Okay? I was listening to a sermon by Michael Todd. I think it's part 4 of the series he's doing now. And it's just like, don't minimize your greatness comparing it to other people. And he didn't say that exactly, but it's kind of like, if all I made was $60,000 a year, but I'm doing what God asked me to do and I'm with my family, that is being great. For me, success is me doing what God asks of me to do. That's greatness. And I can't compare my greatness to everybody else's greatness because, one, I don't know what their relationship with God is like either. So I really like that point about you are already great. You are already great, okay? And you're going to continue to grow and be great. Like, it's a never-ending cycle of life until you die. Literally. You got every day until you die. So live every day. I don't want to use that live every day like it's your last, but it's true. And if your last day is literally going to work, cooking, and eating with your family and going to bed, that is still a great day because you are alive. Let's get into our new segment called Crew Love. I love the crew, and I love the fact that you guys give feedback, and I really want you to go to Apple and Spotify and give us 5 stars, leave a review. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and tell a friend. I would appreciate it. Crew Love today, the review was, I love this podcast. It was by one of our crew members, Sage Reeves, and she says, Sade is amazing, and one thing she gonna do is expand our minds, but in a loving way. She gets a 10 out of 5. Hashtag I love the crew. Hey, thanks for sharing your crew love. I appreciate it. I don't care what nobody say. You want to hear people relate to what you're doing. That's why we create. It's not that you need validation. It's just like you're celebrating. This is a way of celebrating. So celebrate with the crew. Leave a written review so I can share with the rest of the crew. And I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing that. That was our second review on the Apple Podcast app. So if you have Spotify, leave it there. And I really appreciate it. I'm working on trying to get us on iHeart as well. So I'll keep you guys posted on that. Let's get into the challenge of the week. Okay, the challenge of the week goes back to page 144. And it's the do you this week. Listen, the importance of saying no. Every decision you make, I want you to make sure that you're doing it because you want to do it and not because you feel obligated. Okay? That's what I want you to do. The challenge of the week is to do you. I want you to do things not because you feel obligated, but because you want to do it. Not because you fear the consequences of not doing it and how you're going to look. I want to make sure you're staying true to yourself. I want you to perform without conditions or expectations, okay? So that is your challenge of the week, all right? So go out, girl, and do you, boo-boo. I don't know why I just felt like saying it that way. So let's get into Ask Advice. What would the crew do? When you need advice, I'm here to give it to you, and I'm going to do my best, so don't be shy. Today's question comes from the crew. It says, oh, it's so on topic. The question is, should your love language be considered in friendships and vice versa? You know, Do you guys know the 4 love languages? Or 5. It's 5. It's words of affirmation, quality time, giving gifts, acts of service, physical touch. Okay, so I do think these are important, but I also think these are important with boundaries. And I also think you definitely have to communicate, because your friends can't read your mind. No matter how long you've known each other, you can't read your mind. And when you're talking to anybody, you have to be open to listen. We have one mouth and 2 ears for a reason, and we have to communicate that. Now, if you have a friend and they don't respect your boundaries or don't want to give to your love language, don't be offended. You've given them the opportunity to do it. If they don't want to do it and show up in your life that way, they have the right to not. And you can't be mad. And you shouldn't badmouth people on how they show up for you. 1, especially if you're not communicating to them how you want them to show up. And 2, if they decide not to show up in that way, you can't be mad at that either. You have to respect. The same way you want them to respect you, that's how you should respect their choices and decisions. And if you feel like there's an issue, address the issue if you care enough and love them enough. But you have to remember, you can't be responsible on how people respond. So yes, I do think it's important to consider love language in friendships and vice versa. But you have to be open to the fact that if they don't show up that way, you have the right to accept it. They have the right to not. Okay? So yes, that's my advice on that. Really good question, though. Should your love language be considered in friendships and vice versa? Good question. So let me get into the quote of the week. The quote of the week comes from page 177, and it's by Haley Comment. The fear of death follows from the fear of life. A man who lives fully is prepared to die at any time. You know why? Because they did not live in regret. Yes. Thanks for hanging out with the Crew Book Club podcast. I will see you all next week right here on the Crew Book Club podcast. Hey. Want to be a part of the crew? Hit that follow button so you'll never miss an episode. And while you're at it, we would appreciate you showing crew love by rating the show on iTunes and Spotify. Don't keep all this goodness to yourself. Share and tell a friend so your whole crew can be growing with you. Let me be the first to tell you, thank you and welcome to the crew.